Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now here's your host, Julie Michelson.
Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson, and today I'm joined by Dr. Alex Swenson Ridley, and our conversation is all about transformational healing and how essential it is to deal with our emotions to find true wellness. Alex gives us a tutorial on quantum physics and its role in healing and health, and how we need to ditch selfless syndrome to be our best selves. Dr. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am excited as well. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I love to start out with your story because what you're doing is so important and so unique that I'm pretty sure it wasn't your dream when you were little to be bringing this to women in the world. So if you're willing, as much of your story as you're willing to share with us, how did you get to be in this field?
Yeah. Well, there's lots of stages to my journey. So I'll kind of summarize the shorter one. We were talking before the show, you were asking how I ended up in Alaska, and I ended up in Alaska shortly after. I'm originally a chiropractor, and moved here for a job and found out I was pregnant 3 days before I came. And that was kind of the start of me learning about hormones and all of this stuff, because I actually had a really hard pregnancy. My son ended up coming 5 weeks early, and no one could tell me why, because I was 28, I was super healthy. I lost weight during pregnancy instead of putting it on, which actually wasn't that healthy. But ultimately, as I was researching it and doing all this stuff, I shared with you, my first marriage was really hard. My ex-husband struggled with alcoholism, so there's a lot of toxic stress and trauma, emotional abuse and stuff in our marriage. And then the guy I worked for was actually legitimately crazy and ended up in jail for 25 years. So
okay.
I didn't share that part of it with you, but I'm dealing, I'm in these environments while I'm pregnant. And so I finally, doing research, learned about toxic stress and that it impacts our hormones. And so when you have a baby, like either your progesterone drops and you start a period, or it stays high and you are pregnant, and then when it drops, you have a baby. And so that was kind of my first foray into that, but I was a chiropractor, so I was in a really different world. And, I ended up as a single mom growing a huge chiropractic practice. We grossed over 7 figures. The busiest year, I built all that in 5 years. I started it when my son was 6 weeks old. And I had this moment, I just bought this, 6,000 square foot building and remodeled it, spent like $500,000 on this thing. And I walked up to my new beautiful office and just remember looking around and being like, this is not the dream. Like, I was exhausted. My hair was falling out. I was losing my voice at night. I didn't have energy to even cook my son dinner, much less play with him at that point. And I knew something had to change. And I also knew that I wasn't willing to go down the route that, traditional Western medicine would say, because chances are they would have said, oh, you're fine. But I knew,
you're tired, you're a new mom.
Right. My thyroid was off and my hormones were a mess. And I knew that stress was a huge contributor to that. So it led me on, a journey of completely shifting my life. I'm not a practicing chiropractor anymore. I also had 6 tears in my wrist from that career. So things just had to change. And that really led me to, where I'm at. I know we're going to have the quantum physics conversation, which has been the newest notch in what I'm doing. But in terms of working with women and really focusing on hormones, a lot of it was my own journey. I had the experience of waking up and my pants didn't fit and I was too exhausted to do anything and didn't have any motivation or the energy to find the motivation and all of that stuff. And, figuring out how to overcome that and really design life so that I'm healthy, which I can finally say I am. So
yay. And that's how, that's how we get here, right? As our journey becomes the gift, not just for us, but hopefully, at least in your place and my place, for many, many other women, people, children, families, as we shift, as you focus on women, and in the autoimmune world, many of my clients are women,
Yeah.
probably most, not all.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as we shift the idea of health and wellness for women,
Mhm.
we're impacting future generations. We're impacting those
Yeah.
children. And that ripple effect is really the reward I had no idea about when I started my business. I was, and I'm always thrilled, each person, but now that I understand, we're changing families. We're hopefully
Yeah.
eventually changing healthcare, wellness, all of it. I know I'm
Absolutely.
like, oh, I said I wanted to talk about quantum physics and
Right.
health, but I'm like, there's so many other points in your journey I want to talk about too. I want to highlight, I literally just had this conversation with a client right before we hopped on, which was you talked about the not having the energy, right? Like being the mom. What I was sharing with this client who has started making amazing changes, and her energy, she's actually brilliant. She is in a better place, certainly far from her sickest, but was ready to take the next up level, and is finding the like, oh, I have more energy, and I have this is
Yeah.
better and that's better. And she's executing like a rock star because she has the energy to do it. And I was sharing with her a story about another client who could be your client, I'm sure, textbook, entrepreneur, business owner, loves her business, loves her children. When we first started working together, there was a point in which she said to me, almost like, do you think I'm a bad mom? Because it was easier for her to be at the office
Yeah.
than home with her young children. And she was thinking of it, I think was just, that's what I enjoy better. And I said, which even if that is the case, like, absolutely not. That doesn't make you a bad mom. Like, everybody needs to be who they are. Well, her health is just remarkably improved. And she texts me all the time. I'm having so much fun playing. Like, it used to be self-care was like, how far can I get from my family? And now that she has energy, she's like, I really love playing with my children. And we don't realize that when our gas tank is empty and we're tapped out, that it's not a decision. It's not a flaw. It's not there's only so much we can do. And so I wanted to just highlight that part of your story with it's whether it's hormones, and people, it's always hormones at some point, just like it's
They're
always
always on.
toxins, and it's always,
Toxins affect hormones, and hormones affect that. Like, it's all,
and stress affects, chronic stress is a toxin, and that affects hormones, and we get into this cycle. And so kudos to you for even asking the question at 28, like, why would I deliver early? Like,
most people that like, I asked my, I had a nurse midwife because it ended up being emergency. So I had to, get away from my birth center here. Alaska has really weird midwifery laws, but they're like, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, don't you care? Like, what don't we want to understand? I've always been that way. Like, but why? Like, I'm always when I developed asthma and allergies at age 12, I'm like, but why? And they're like, oh, I don't know. It just happens. I'm like, no, actually, I was vaccine injured is how that happened. But, now I understand that.
right.
Yeah.
And I feel like, but why should be, everybody says functional medicine is root cause medicine. I really think the slogan for functional medicine should be, but why? Because that's where it is. It's like Western medicine stops. It's not wrong or bad or whatever. It just stops at this is, and usually this is a symptom with a name that they call a diagnosis, and they don't ask, but why? My middle child I went into labor 2 months early and was able to cook them for another month. And I didn't ask why at the time. That's not true. I got the I don't know, and then I got to be terrified through my whole next pregnancy that it was going to happen again.
Again,
Because
yeah,
we didn't know why it happened in the first place.
right.
So kudos to you for being, curious. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think it's important in how we approach our health. We're so used to the Western model where it's like the doctor just says this is, and I like the omnipotent being. And really, we have to come at it with this curiosity of looking at everything about our lives because it all impacts our health. So
It really does. And
yeah,
we need to retrain to become our own advocates. And
yes,
if we don't get the answer to but why, we keep looking. We need
yeah,
to look elsewhere as
yeah,
well. So I love that. And you mentioned, I said we're going to move away from it, but toxic stress. I love that you use that expression as I was talking about stress and toxins, because we all live under chronic stress, whether it's big stressors, little stressors, daily stressors,
yeah,
that combo, the layer, different toxic stress, trauma, loss, grief, all of those things. And I know you work around all of that, and with all of that. And it is such an essential, I mean, we all do. I did an interview with a friend who's a trauma healer, and I am
yeah,
not certified. I'm not a trauma healer. I don't call, but we address trauma. Every
yeah.
client I work with, you're not going to get long-term results. You're not going to get true healing. And
I feel
so
you. Yeah,
I wanted to highlight all of that because what you're doing, that's the holistic part, is helping women not be where you were when you were 5 years into
yeah,
practice with your hair falling out at what should have been a great milestone that wasn't. Oh,
yeah. Like the celebration was not there. And speaking to the trauma, like you, I'm not certified in any way in trauma healing, but what I find so interesting is the women I work with, and for whatever reason, my life experience actually has led to me working with women older than me. So I'm 37 now, for those listening, but most of my clients are in their 40s and 50s. A lot of them, dealing with autoimmune and a lot of stuff. But as we go through a journey where the physical body starts to feel better, many of them, like 90%, are suddenly like, hey, so I have this, thing that happened to me when I was 14 that I've never told anybody about. And
yeah.
I feel ready to process that. And like, that is where I interviewed a woman on my show that was talking about this as well. Like, if we're really looking at root cause, trauma is a huge piece of it. And like how we define trauma, like I have, what ends up in like what they call an A score or whatever on the trauma scale, because I had actual abuse and, I don't want to say actual, but so many of us experience traumas, even if you don't feel like we tend to, make this hierarchy of traumas, kind of like we make a hierarchy of
Right.
what someone looks
And
like or whatever.
we're all
But
different, and
it's
it
all
doesn't,
affecting us. Like, it
yeah,
doesn't matter if you've had that level or not, like it's still trauma.
it can be a bunch of little t traumas. And
Yeah, they still
it
add
could
up.
also be that you experience trauma and you don't identify it as trauma.
Hmm.
Or you've pushed it away and locked it
Yeah,
in a box. It's still in there. It's still in your cells. It's still in your body. And
it
so
is.
I love that you brought that up, because it can go either way. Some people can't reach that level of physical healing until they work on that trauma and work on
Yeah.
healing that. But also, we were talking about energy, right? Like, now I have
Hmm.
the energy to do, like, now, once you handled all these other things, your body, you have the energy to also, begin to
Yeah.
look at that trauma and deal with it.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad you pointed that out.
Yeah. And in some levels, so we can start diving a little bit into the quantum
Yes.
physics things there. So, like, for listeners who, you aren't familiar with me, I've been working on a PhD in integrative medicine that's based in quantum physics. So that was like part of this. And quantum physics is like amazing and cool. And I'll be totally honest, I've been studying it for 2 years and I still feel like I don't completely understand it, but I've
Well,
got to be surfacey. But, a lot of when we talk about energy, like our body actually stores energy in different places. And in us, you can call it chakras. I like to call it energy centers, but we have different centers and they've actually measured this. And so one of the ways that I have started working with women to move that and just get access to the energy that we already have stored is we have to deal with emotional stuff. And I know for me, when I started doing that work, it was like my third center, which is kind of, the pit of your gut, if you will, like that area. It's related to willpower as the emotion. And I would just feel like it was dead. Like there was nothing there. And I had been through such a high level of stress for so many years. It was like, I didn't have the emotional capacity to push myself anymore, especially like physically, any of that. And that was a lot of where the energy came from. And so I've been working on just, I actually had to give myself a picture of like a dual decked dagger is like my sort of strength and work through that. But that's been able to, like, I've started to be able to just release a lot more energy and feel like that ability to push myself again, which a lot of us, when we're trying to get healthy or whatnot, we tend to go, the autoimmune world is a little bit different, but I think we try to go to the things where we're pushing and pushing and pushing, but first we need to go within to really find that energy again and have it come out. And so this is getting a little more in the esoteric world, but there's
and I love that. I want to actually back it all the way up, either from Webster or whoever or you. Quantum physics, like let's go all the way back to, because people are like, wait, why are you talking about quantum physics today? What is quantum physics? Let's start there.
So let's start there. Like, in the most simplest way I understand it is, it's physics that explains the things we can't see. It's based in energy. I geeked out a lot during my initial courses because I'm like, oh my gosh, this explains the existence of God and all this stuff that honestly science just either has holes. Like, I don't know about you, as I was going through my education, it would be like things about Darwinism, for example. Like, there's certain things that just don't make sense about natural selection and all of that. And quantum physics comes in and like fills in those holes, because ultimately what it's talking about is that there is a universal intelligence. You can call it God, you can call it whatever you want, but there's something that connects us all. And healing doesn't happen from, in the cell. It's not like you go bottom up, like, oh, if we fix this thing, everything else will work. It's top down. So we call it downward causation. So there's actually an intelligence that exists in the world that is, where thought is organized and where matter comes into existence. So like, we are actually a representation of a thought that combines matter into something that we see. Getting like really basic.
No, that was just awesome. I love it. And I love, people think of the study, thank goodness, of quantum physics has become more and more popular.
Yeah.
More recently, as we get re-enlightened, if you will. And I mean, that's the beauty of it, is it is so not new.
It's not. And what's amazing about it is all of like the knowledge we have from like ancient Chinese medicine and some of the things that have been around for thousands of years, like essential oils. A lot of the tools that have been out there that have been poo-pooed by modernization of all the woo-woo stuff. Quantum physics actually explains how it works scientifically.
Right. Well, and that's what I love about it, is it actually shows you the science of it. When I was studying in a program based in ancient Chinese medicine and quantum physics, we had so many engineers in the program, and it was because it does explain, like, it gives you the science, it gives you this basis. So that's kind of the like 101 or remedial almost.
101,
like, what is quantum physics?
Quantum physics.
So you talked about healing doesn't happen in the cell, and talked about this downward causation. How are you utilizing, why should we care about quantum physics when it comes to healing? And I mean, I kind of just said it, but tell us more about that.
With healing and with quantum physics. So to take it another step farther, I'm going to forget the guy's name. Sheldrake, I think is who it is. They've mapped, they call it morphogenetic fields, which is we have these morphogenetic fields around us, and essentially all of our organs have a blueprint. And what happens in disease is somehow the wrong meaning gets assigned to the blueprint. So it can be from thoughts, it can be from traumas, it can be like whatever it is, we create disease essentially by the wrong meaning getting assigned. So when you look at healing, and when we're talking about autoimmune stuff in particular, like we're dealing with the body's reacting against itself, in the most simplistic words. You've probably talked about this quite a bit on your show, but this is not my specialty, so chime in wherever you want. But when we're talking about healing, it's about creating the space where the body is able to receive the correct messages. And so like this relates to my world as a chiropractor. Part of my chiropractic self was geeking out because we talk about innate intelligence, and then there's a couple other like naturopathic physicians as well talk about a similar thing, but it's this idea that there's an intelligence that, impacts our healing. And so it's about clearing the pathways and allowing that to happen. And there's different, ways that we start to access what they call the quantum field and hold space for a new possibility for yourself. But a lot of it's getting out of your own way and dealing with more of the emotional side of healing. Like so much of it is from that, because that's where meanings get assigned. Joe Dispenza, I mentioned him with a guest I interviewed, and she like freaked out on me a little bit, but he's someone I've learned from a lot. And just, he explains that thoughts are the feeling, like the feelings of the brain, and the emotions are the feelings of the body, and you have to have the two together. And our brain and our thoughts are kind of what connect us to the quantum field as well. So we have to be able to like get to that place. I don't know if I'm making sense. Just stop me if you have
No,
questions.
you're totally making sense. I want to highlight the idea of, which is very actually Dispenza-esque, holding space for new possibility for yourself. And I wanted to highlight that because as my work has continued to evolve, that this would be something, we would always get to. And now this is where we start, right? Like if you want to, I always say, like, I was so fortunate to be able to heal when I didn't think I could. I didn't know how to. I didn't. But that's the exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
We all can heal, but if you want to expedite that process, shifting into a space where you're holding that possibility is key. I know.
I'd say it's the key. Like I talk a lot about, and I've had, what's been so interesting on my quantum physics journey is a lot of the training I had early on where they didn't have the language around what quantum physics was. This was actually what they were doing. Right? And, so any transformational process, which I talk a lot about, transformational healing, and that is my commitment to the women I work with, is like, we are transforming your life and your hormones and everything in your body, but it starts with who you're being. And, James Clear talks about this in Atomic Habits. I learned about this, and like, we tend to think that we need, when we finally get healthy, then we can do these things and then we'll be a certain way. But you actually have to flip that around, and it's about stepping into who do you need to be in order to create that. And that's where, holding that new possibility really comes from. So
I love that. I'm like, oh, do I ask?
Oh, do it. Ask away.
So if you can, I don't know that there's can you share with us, like, where does one start with that? Like, how do you even, if this is something that's completely new, I find a lot of people kind of trip into it accidentally, right? Like
like maybe you don't consciously know that's what you're doing. But
right. They want to learn about meditation, so they'll pick up a Dispenza book, or they, and then it's like, oh, wait, and I'd want to circle way back to something you said before, as far as my experience has always been regarding quantum physics and this universal knowledge, is that it doesn't matter what religion you are. It doesn't matter. It just, I can't imagine. Well, maybe I can't imagine some people that like it wouldn't resonate with at all, but nobody that lives with any kind of faith-based life or spiritual awareness. It's like kind of the aha, like, oh, that's why. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So speaking of that, and then we can come
Yeah.
back into this idea of being, because I identify as a Christian, and I actually came to my faith like late in life. I was 26 or 27 when I moved to the Bible Belt and Jesus found me. We'll go with that. But
I love that.
I wrote a social media post that I like haven't posted yet because I'm like, oh, do I really want to go here? But in learning about, because a lot of quantum physics and integrative medicine and function, like we start learning about things that came out of more of the Eastern philosophies and whatnot. And you can absolutely utilize them and be fully within like the understanding of your Christianity, if that's what you identify as, and you don't have to identify there. So,
and I'm Jewish and I feel exactly the same way. And it's not just Judeo-Christian though. It's
right.
bigger
like,
than that.
It's anybody.
All of it. Yeah.
I believe like those of faith, no matter what you are, like so much of a component of it is just love. And so loving each other, loving yourself, that's a hard one for women.
Yes.
And it might just be starting there. Like a lot of it is about shifting the emotions that you've been dwelling on. Like the things we focus on are the things that we tend to produce more of. So if you're always focused on your pain or your weight or that you don't have any energy, like you're going to create more of that. I have experienced this many, many, many ways. And, so getting into the other question around like, how do we start accessing this? It's things like meditation. Like I didn't meditate until January of this year, and I now meditate every day. I learned a lot of how to meditate from Joe Dispenza, but before that, his are kind of time intensive. So I had to learn that, oh, this is beneficial and I should make the time for it, before that. But just focusing on feeling those emotions. Where do you feel them in your body? Like allowing yourself,
which is really hard for some people.
Really hard. Like I sucked at this. I'll just be honest. It's like feelings. What do you? Because I'm really good at.
Well, it wasn't safe for you for a long time to feel your feelings. You wouldn't have
and that was
made it through your days.
I didn't even dive into my childhood, which was also
right.
I kind of recreated my relationship with my mom and who I married, but I love my mom to death. We're still working on it, and so it's being willing to dig into those things, because we also have unconscious patterning and wiring in our brain that will keep us stuck in the same pattern. So it's finding the ways to increase your perspective, to just allow yourself to experience something new, and then watch for where those things show up.
And I love what you focus on, create more of is so true. I have, a lot of people, and I do think that meditation isn't for everybody at every time in their life. Like it's hard to imagine, but in certain cases, but I also know it's just something that people are very resistant to sometimes. And I have spent a lot of time, and I've talked on the podcast and in my courses about, kind of debunking those myths and reasons of, you don't have to do it for an hour, and, you're not doing it wrong, and you don't stink at it and all those things. And I have a meditation practice. It was a really big part of my healing journey. But this idea of, where your attention goes is so important that for me, one of the things I use with all my clients, because I love it, and it's short, it's fast, the bang for the buck is there, is gratitude journaling.
Yeah.
Because like you said, like if you're fixating on whatever that thing is you want to change, well, you're probably not going to change it.
Yeah.
But when you start, and that's it's just it's a tool of expanding that view, if you will, kind of pulling your lens back. But it is amazing. And people say to me, well, I'm grateful. And I'm like, no, I know you're grateful. I'm not saying you're not grateful. This should be so easy because you are grateful. And even, the people that are clearly walk around every day in a place of gratitude, when you just have that practice of writing with a handheld utensil, pen or pencil, to create, strengthen those neural pathways faster. But then they'll even say like, wow, like it's everywhere. Like everywhere I look, there's something. I'm like, look at that.
I know. And you might be starting, I've had clients that I've said like, as a starting point, hey, let's just, each day write down 3 things you're grateful for. And they're
That's
like,
what we
3?
do.
I
3
can't do 3.
things.
Like, I want it. How about 1? I'm like, fine, start with 1, but like you can find 3 things you can be grateful for.
We can all find 3 things. And I have said before, if it's a really bad day, if you can if you can hold the pen, like there's 1 thing to be grateful for right there. Like, I mean, we can always find it. And then I joke and I'm like, of course you have permission to write more than 3, but the win is 3. And that that just eliminates all the resistance for people.
Yeah.
To start to create the habit, and then they're like hooked, and I love it. And so I just wanted to kind of share that as a tool. And again, I love meditation. It was huge for me, but like, look at where you've come and what you've accomplished without a dedicated meditation practice. So it's not the only route to wellness.
No, it's not. And I was going to add to that, the whole idea behind meditation and why it's so powerful is you're changing brainwave states, right? And so we tend to live in like high beta, which is super stressed out mode, like type A, like overwhelmed. I've got all this stuff going on. And meditation is just a tool that helps you shift from that to alpha or theta state. And alpha is like where creativity lies, and theta is kind of that right before you fall asleep kind of experience. And so I've seen cool things happen in my life doing that, but I also recognize there's been other ways that I've done that throughout my life without realizing it. And a lot of us have those, and they tend to be things maybe we don't make time for. So you could do it, any kind of creative thing that you have. Like I actually play the violin, and whenever I play the violin, I just zone out on music and it's amazing. So, you might have something like that, or you draw. Like my drawing is like a 5th grader's, and my son makes fun of me, but it's something that calms me down and gets me out of that. It's just shifting the focus of your brain, like from Joe Dispenza talks about convergent and divergent focus. So both going within and without, like, and just being aware of yourself in the world. So you can do that lots of different ways. It doesn't have to be
you can. And I feel like too, oftentimes those things that you just mentioned are things that adults and women in particular have moved away from, have fallen out of their routines because they don't take the time for themselves and focus on themselves. And I have so many clients, and I'm like, I'm not a painter, I'm not an artist, so I don't think I'm attracting people in that way, but I have so many clients who are painters and they're gifted and they're artists of some sort, and we're all creative in one way or another. Even if we don't look at it that way. But it is interesting. And so for these particular clients, that's become part of their wellness routine, is taking the time to do that, because it's not just, I love that you pointed that out. It's not just a stress reliever or and when you're changing brainwave states, really good stuff is happening. I think of it as like it's another fitness area.
It is,
right?
Yeah. Like there's, that way I actually started learning meditation. There's an app called FitMind, and they come at meditation completely from the science perspective. But you just started for 1 minute, and it's all about just training the muscle of your brain to go in and out of those states, and to be able to do it, without having to close your eyes and put on the weighted blanket and diffuse the oils and all the things. Like just it's another way you're building fitness in your body.
I love that. That's amazing. I do want to touch on, I know I was like, I want to talk about quantum physics. But I want to talk about everything, all the things. I know we can't dig into all of it. But I do want to touch on, because I want to give listeners a really good idea of your focus and what you're bringing to the world. And so I want to talk about selfless syndrome, because I feel like that was the perfect segue as I was talking about women who no longer do the things that, so tell us about that. How you see it and fix it.
All that.
In 3 minutes or less. How do you fix selfless syndrome?
How do we figure that? It takes some time. So selfless syndrome, we've alluded to it a couple times here. It's just I've almost been like, hey, I call that selfless syndrome.
You should have.
It's the innate desire we all have as women to take care of everyone and everything else except ourselves. And, we are so wired to put our kids first and our family first and our career first, and like everything else comes first. And I'm not necessarily, I get a lot of pushback on like, well, isn't being selfless a good thing? And I'm like, yeah, but if you're not taking care of yourself, like you're only as good to the people around you as, healthy you are. So if you're consistently just running yourself ragged and not getting enough sleep and you don't have energy and you're, generally you start getting mean to everybody. Like I know when I'm not making time for what I need to make time for, I'm not the world's nicest mom or wife or any of those things. And so, in shifting that, I think it comes to, there's a couple of things, like as a society, we have to really move away from whatever it is, because our role as women has also changed. I tend to be kind of a feminist. So, we've gone from like more women are in the workplace or owning businesses or like doing more than just being at home. And I'm also, those who are at home, I'm not saying that's like just a thing and you should feel like you should have all the time in the world at all. Like that's a three-time job, I would say. Like for every kid you have, it's a full-time job. Whatever it is. But it's having that willingness to recognize like we are important. And I think some of it comes down to self-worth as well. I'm throwing all kinds of stuff at you, right? But we have to see ourselves, view ourselves as worthy, and realize that our self-care is actually one of the ways that we serve the people and the things that we love.
Oh, say that again.
So our self-care is one of the most important way, I would argue, that we serve the people and the things that we love. Because when we are full ourselves, we have more to give.
And that is what makes us the better mom, the better partner, the better business owner, the better friend, daughter, sister, whatever, fill in the blank. It sounds so oversimplified to say oxygen mask on yourself first.
Yeah.
Right. But that is really what it comes down to. If you are putting yourself last, it will catch up eventually. Some people get away with it for longer than others.
Yeah, which is why I probably mostly work with women in their 40s and 50s. I just did, the crash in light years in 5 years when I was in my mid 30s. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, it depends on when the hormone component steps in. You got to experience that early too. So many women that I see are in that same age group also, and or symptoms came on with pregnancy or right after a delivery, and it's like, nobody thought to think like, oh, could this be triggered by hormones? Why are hormones doing that to you? And so it's such a huge component. But it takes, I see, and I'm guessing you see the same, it takes retraining. Like it's not enough to listen to this episode and be like, oh, they must be right. Like it's important. It's not, self-care is not selfish. It is the best gift you can give people. And not even just the people that you care about, really anybody who comes into contact with you throughout your day. Seriously.
Like you can be that person who smiles at everyone in the store. And like, I am now that person. Like I feel so light and just like happy going out.
And people are now back to the quantum physics. People are drawn to that, right?
They are.
Strangers come up and start conversations.
Yeah.
Because we all realize like we want more of that. And so is this something, I'm guessing since you coined a term, this is something you see pretty much across the board in your clients?
Yeah. And honestly, when you were talking about, kids and families, so my original hat, I was a pediatric and perinatal chiropractor. So, I worked with moms and babies. And the more I worked with little kids and babies in the pediatric side of my practice, the more I saw moms and grandmas or aunts or, whoever, who were not taking care of themselves. They were exhausted. They were like, dying on the couch while I'm adjusting their kid. And I was like, that's where we need to make the shift and the change, because, our kids are going to be more and more screwed up the less we have available to give them. And so that's kind of what led to my journey.
And that's a perspective I try to kind of share with my clients when they're resistant. It does feel, I want to acknowledge, like for anybody who's like, oh, it sounds so easy in theory. It's uncomfortable in the beginning when you're starting to honor
Hard.
yourself and prioritize yourself. And one of the ways I try to encourage people is like, what would you want for your daughter? Like,
Yeah.
would you encourage fill in somebody else, a friend, a child, a loved one? What would you say to them taking a half hour a day to, like it
Yeah. I
just,
mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not much time
no,
and it makes such a difference. But, I've totally been there, like feeling
we all
guilty
have.
for going for a run or, whatever it is, or my kids like, no, I need you to do this. And, sometimes it's legit what he needs. And other times it's like, hey, mommy will be much better for you
Yep.
if you let me do this first.
Habits and patterns.
Yeah.
And when I first started a dedicated meditation routine, I was meditating twice a day. So morning and afternoon, 20 minutes. And the afternoon one was always the harder one to get in. And
Yep.
sometimes I'd miss it. And if I missed it 2 days in a row or more, my daughter, who was then a teenager, would say, why don't I drive and you can meditate in the car? She would notice, and I'm pretty chill.
Yeah.
Like, I think I'm great. I'm not uptight. I'm not, she could notice, she could totally notice a difference. And so,
Yeah.
She learned like, oh, thank goodness through watching me that like actually taking care of myself and prioritizing those things that do work and keep me running are important. I call them non-negotiables. They it takes a while to figure out what that is.
Yeah. And when you do, it makes such a difference. Same with my kid. Like he watches, and even Joe Dispenza talks about, he had 3 kids and he said he would just sit down in the middle of the living room with headphones and a weighted blanket and they would just play around him while he meditated.
Yeah.
And my son too, he knows that in the morning, like that's what mommy's doing.
It's mommy's time. Yep.
He came up with his own meditation and stuff, and I'm like, cool.
I love it. And again, see that there's that trickle down of like,
what we
he's
do.
Not going to be in his 30s playing with meditation for his first time, or 40s or 50s or 60s or I love that. That is amazing. So we kind of, because I couldn't stay focused because what you're doing is too important. And I want people to understand how it all comes together, right? It really, if you're not creating self-care, studying quantum physics probably isn't going to help your healing.
And that you have to be willing to take the actions too. Because I find this for myself, like, it's, especially when I was going through the stuff with my ex-husband, and it's like I'm reading everything looking for an answer because I want someone to just give me an answer.
Right.
And a lot of it came down to I needed to just, a lot of times we need to go inside before we can, like, we always tend to look outside ourselves for the solution to, especially with disease or illness, or if you have a diagnosis, it's always like, what from the outside can I bring in? And a lot of times we need to go inside first.
Absolutely.
Not a lot of times. I'd say like 100%
Always.
of the time. You need to go inside first before any of that stuff's going to make a difference. That's where, like, women who, when you have hormone issues, you can't lose weight, or that tends to be a big one that I deal with. And I'm like, we're going to work on how we relate to food and stress and all this stuff first. Because
and I always,
it's not going to make a difference until you do.
Coaching perspective is heart-centered, heart-based coaching. And so my perspective is, yes, I am an autoimmune expert, but I'm not coaching with my expertise. I'm offering resources with my expertise. Nobody's an expert on you but you. And it's helping you get to that place where you can hear it, you can feel it, you can learn to trust it. And like you said, and it's always a work. I still discount the voice that comes up that's always right.
Yep.
Because, I'll talk myself out of it using logic or, whatever, public opinion or, and so that's just like our up leveling our health and our self-care and changing and growing and adapting all of those things. It's the same with using our intuition and listening to that voice and listening to our body. When our body isn't well, it's trying to tell us something. that's what it's doing.
It is. Say, hey, pay attention to me.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
So, I even went so far, this is a total side note, not a plug for anything, but I actually got an Aura ring because it gives
mine's
me
on the charger. I just put it on the charger.
I need to charge mine today, but I love that readiness score because it definitely, most days I can tell like, hey, I feel good, or maybe no, I don't. But there's some days where I am like, oh, I wouldn't work out, but my readiness score is great. And other days where I'm like, I totally would push myself, specifically around exercise. And then it's like, no, you should rest. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's just, sometimes we need that objective data to help us.
Well, and what I find is I just had this conversation on my last interview as well. Then you get good at, you can connect the dots of then align. For me, and I've had an Aura ring since the first generation, so that's about 6 years, I think, a long time. And I used it to help me with certain things, and I use it in coaching too. If somebody has them, it's not a requirement, but many of my clients have them, and if we're doing a food reintroduction, or we're doing, being able to track heart rate and HRV and things like that, or and readiness is like, well, if that's the only thing I changed was I ate tomatoes yesterday, and wow, like look what's going on. It's a great tool. That I always say, and it's not just Aura Ring, there are other good ones out there. Any of them, you look for the trends you're looking for. But because I've been using it so long, it depends on personality. I have people that I'll say, how did you sleep, or how do you feel? And they'll tell me their Aura score. And I'm like, no. That I didn't ask what Aura thinks about how you slept. And I used to joke because I would get really bummed. I would wake up and be like, oh, I slept great. And then I would look at the Aura score and it was like terrible. And I'm like, oh, well, now I don't feel that good. So we got to know, but using tools and having the data. I'm a biohack. I came to functional medicine through biohacking. So I love gadgets and tools and anything that can help us, for sure. Absolutely. So before we wrap up, for listeners that are listening on the go, all of everything will be in the show notes, but where's the best place for them to find you and check out your work?
Yeah, so probably the best is, I also host a podcast called Emerge, the health podcast for busy, high-performing women. So if you're on the go, go listen to that one. And then the other places, I have a free group on Facebook where I show up and teach live, and it's a place to just interact and connect. So I can give you both of those links to throw in the show notes. But
fantastic. What's the group called? So somebody, because not everybody, she doesn't know.
I think it's called Emergent Women, the what did I call it? Health for women looking for answers and results. That's what it is.
Okay. But look for Emergent Women and you'll find Dr. Alex on there. And then for those of you that are willing to take the time and look in the show notes for links, they will be in the show notes too. But I know sometimes I'm listening and I'm like, I just wish people would just tell me because I'm driving or I don't know. So what is this is not meant to be a trick question or throw you under the bus, but what is one step that listeners can take today to start to move the needle to improve their health, of all the things, or it could be something you didn't cover.
It is something we didn't cover, actually. So of all the things, like before you get to meditation or any of these, undertakings, the easiest, simplest thing to start with is breathing and water, because most of us don't remember how to breathe correctly. And if you look at the hierarchy of needs, like we can only live without air for like 2 minutes. Water, it's a few days, and then food, we can actually live quite a while without. So, I teach like deep breathing, so making sure you're getting full diaphragmatic breaths and all that can start to alter your brain state. A lot of things we talked about. So, like, if that's the one thing you do twice a day, is take 5 deep breaths. It honestly will start to shift a lot of stuff. And the other thing is, drinking at least half your body weight in ounces of water, which I find some women either nail or are like, what?
So such a big fail. It's something we're constantly working on. And both of those things are so important. We take them both for granted and we don't always think about them. And, when you look at all of the different symptoms that could just be from dehydration, because we're not drinking enough water, it's kind of ridiculous. It really should be the first thing doctors ask when somebody comes in is how much water are you drinking?
Yeah.
And the deep breaths is funny. That was something that when you were talking about, we talked about kind of changing brainwave states as an exercise, right? And I was thinking about breathing when you said that. That's something that I love to do on the spot that people don't necessarily know you're doing, to avoid a stress response or reset or so I love those answers. That is amazing.
Well, and an idea for the breathing, like back when I actually left my house and work from home, back in those days, I would take 3 to 5 deep breaths with each transition. So like when I got in my car to leave in the morning, and then when I got to the office, and if I actually had the time built in, I would do it in between patients when I was the chiropractor. But as much as you
love
can,
that.
like just
That
give yourself
was
a reset.
I did, which was still in the work at the beginning of the world shutting down. I did a presentation for over 100 Pakistani physicians, and that was the recommendation. Some of the action items we had at the end of the talk was I challenged them to do, we did breathing exercises in the presentation as well, and it was, do it, and they are in the typical hospital-based model. And so that was my recommendation. As you walk each patient out to go get the next patient, just do it between patients. Do it, like you said, when you arrive in your parking spot somewhere, or whatever those things are that you can attach it to so that you're doing it regularly. It is something that again, just like the water, people don't think about, and we all become very shallow breathers, and we're if you're not doing it consciously, you're not doing it. So there's such good advice.
Make a world of difference in your life too. So that's what I got.
Thank you so much, Alex, for joining us today. You have shared amazing gold.
I had a pleasure being here. Thank you.
For everyone listening, remember you can get the show notes and transcripts by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I will see you all next week.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.